So I understand that. I mean, this might actually be, this is an interesting conversation now for a few minutes. So like, I don't have, I think part of what's going on with the Warren dynamic is definitely there is some proxy warfare going on of like, oh, well, a lot of ultra annoying, disingenuous people are supporting her, and that's bleeding into, there's no doubt about that. And that does matter to some extent because your coalition and who you're building.
It's like, what are you giving off that is attracting these people?
Right.
It raises legitimate.
It like, raises legit. Exactly. And then the other part to me, and I think, this is like what, like, I don't know if you read Matt Karp's new piece in Jacobin, which I just think was.
Read most of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think he killed it. I think that to me, that's kind of like probably my best, like, right, this is, someone wrote what I think. And I've been trying to articulate this kind of piece. And I wonder, like, when I think about my politics, I was somebody who, basically started doing this sort of thing to some extent, basically 4 or 5 years ago. I did all sorts of stuff in my 20s, kind of started subbing for Sam and then kind of grew out. And yeah, like I would say there was one element of, okay, there's things like Occupy, then there was Black Lives Matter, and then certainly Sanders 2016. But a major part of my political formation was really going back to being, going to World Bank protests in high school, was like, there is a politics that I actually have, and then I don't want to be completely disconnected from reality. So what is sort of available in the relative space? And, in a political system that is so extremely to the right of where I am, right? And I think that Elizabeth Warren kind of emerges in this time where it's like, you're so under siege that it's like, okay, well, here's like this really effective, committed advocate on a certain set of issues. And she probably doesn't even have, all of a sudden these debates are shockingly relevant. Like, do you think of yourself as Eugene Debs or Justice Brandeis? Right. 3 or 4 years ago, I'm like, shut the fuck up, right? Like, just vote for whoever is going to like not put a Goldman person in charge of, regulating them, right? But now all of a sudden it's like, no, that actually is a distinction in perspective. And so to me, I think part of I'll wrap it up in a second because I know I'm kind of rambling, but I will say,
no, I think this is important stuff.
I think it gets to a lot because one is there is just this actually really serious differences here, and this is where other people get triggered at me because I would say these are more fun and interesting differences than a democratic socialist versus third way trash.
Right.
This is actually I would actually say a much less bureaucratic, much more clear power and labor-oriented view of politics versus a progressive technocratic one. I think that they're, Teddy Roosevelt versus FDR. I mean, these are all like imperfect analogies. And I'm clearly on one side of that. And that's where I want things to go. And I think that debate matters. And I think in a healthier politics, it could actually be a really fruitful debate. People could have it without either on one hand obscuring how big the differences are, which is what the Warren people do, or on the other hand, I agree some people on my side go to like, she's Hillary Clinton or whatever, which I also disagree with. That's also coupled with the fact and my frustration, which is like, in the last 3 years, maybe there was a time when Elizabeth Warren first came on the scene and Bernie Sanders was a cool guy from Vermont who had an interesting brand but was just kind of basically functionally a liberal senator, but not in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole reality has changed. And now that he's putting foreign policy stuff on the table, which I can't separate, and that is actually where I would say it is fair to call Elizabeth Warren a Clinton or a Biden. I haven't seen her put anything on.
Not a Clinton or a Biden, but not a Bernie either.
I mean, she's voted for every single military increase under Trump. She doesn't have any rhetoric on civilian casualty. Substantively, she opposes the trade agreements.
The reason I draw some differences.
Tell me.
The Clinton, Biden care about imperialism.
Right.
And they want to be the executors of that project.
Right.
Whereas I think Warren doesn't care.
I think that's right. That's and if you don't care,
it's not okay.
No, but and even just setting aside the morals of it, and I'll stop in a second. If you don't care, you're definitely going to replicate the same pattern, right? Like if you're going to go after foreign policy, you better have an alternative set of ideas or people, because one, that's the most power you have out of the gate, and two, that's where there's going to be huge institutional resistance. So
the best hope for her on foreign policy is that not caring.
Yeah.
It has recently kind of blended in with her domestic policy, and so she said, "Okay, here are my instincts on domestic policy. How do I transfer those over to the foreign policy element, and bring in people who agree with me there? In other words, how do I get left-wing people who are going to then show me how to carry out a foreign policy?" But I think I think you're hitting on something, but it's slightly different than but. It goes to, I think, a related point, which is that she's not of the left.
Right.
And there's an interesting almost identity politics going on. Like you look at her and you're clearly like, Bernie Sanders, this is a man of the left. Like in every single way. Central America, LGBT stuff in the 70s. You look at his civil rights work in the 60s. You look at him talking about owning the means of production back in the 60s, 70s. Like you get like, this is what his gut's telling him is the right thing to do, and it leads you to trust basically everything he's going to do from there. Whereas Elizabeth Warren has never been a part of the left. She's not been a movement figure.
Right.
She arrived at this place in a completely different way, and at an unusual time where there was no left other than the one that Bernie was part of a marginalized piece of through the 80s and 90s. And so in the 90s, when she starts to become liberal, she's just kind of entering politics fresh. And she had this like weird, like right-wing, like legal ideology that she was into in the 70s and 80s. And
then she becomes, I think in the 90s, she becomes like a third way Democrat. My only pushback though is so sure, there is that of course, I think Bernie, because of his worldview, is going to come to the right. Like he's going to intuitively get, yes, this is why I need to call for freeing Lula, because I don't just believe in some like corruption discourse. I understand how the world works.
He probably knew who Lula was in the 80s.
Right. And that's, so to me, if I'm being transparent, that's it. Like, that's my voting decision's over there. Like, there's nothing more to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think that, I think the way I would push back though on the idea of identity politics is it's like we're still talking about huge policy sets.
It's a complete inversion of identity politics. But
there's big difference. It's a difference of, will you use aid to do something on Israel? Bernie says it. She won't say it. Will you, where are you on these budget cuts? And then I think it does really start to emerge in domestic policy in a really interesting way, which is like the difference between, and this is, I do think it's a continuum of a broader, more centrist democratic tradition, but a more honest one of like, can you remove the impediments to people rising inside a class system versus really saying, not in a particularly radical way, but in a very basic way, that there are just these fundamental categories that we need to stop bullshitting with. People need to have healthcare. We need to get rid of these huge areas of debt. We need to just have baselines to recenter the gravity, the power structure in this society.
Right. Though the part I'd quibble with is the progressive. Would you say progressive technocrat? Like it's more of like what you said earlier, I think Brandeisian, where Brandeis was strongest was when he would identify power centers, and I think what people who write about Brandeis and Warren too neglect is what gave Brandeis the power, which is the labor movement.
Right.
Brandeis himself can write all the papers he wants. As Supreme Court justice, he's got some power, but it takes you a while to get there.
Right.
And he only gets there because of the power of the labor movement, and the labor movement identifying the corporate concentration as an enemy. And so then he kind of elucidates this ideology that you need to break up these power centers, create freer markets. And I know people hate the idea of free markets as being a good thing, but they're better than monopolized markets.
Well,
controlled by-
100%. But I think that's another interesting distinction in terms of where they go in thought process.
Right.
And I agree with you, but I'm more,
But so the progressive technocrats don't think about power, whereas Warren does. Like she identifies who the people are that have power that she needs to attack, and figures out ways to attack their power. And so she will call out by name, CEOs of banks. She's gotten some fired. She's like Bernie called for breaking up the banks, and a lot of her plans are driven by the idea that these power centers need to be broken up. The right is extremely good at thinking in a mirrored version of this toward the left. They look at the left and they think, okay, what are the left's power structures? They see Planned Parenthood. Okay, Planned Parenthood, this is an organization that is out there creating health clinics and basically demonstrating that the left-wing project can be successful, that it can improve the material lives of low-income people.
Right.
And we need to destroy that.
Right.
Unions are raising the material conditions for working people. Those working people are then voting Democratic. We need to destroy unions.
Right.
Or like Acorn.
Yep.
Acorn.
And it's synchronized.
Right. Acorn is out there showing that if you organize a community together, you can get lower priced housing.
Right.
You can get a number of other community benefits. We need to destroy Acorn. So the right is very good at identifying what the left's power sources are.
Right.
And attacking them and wiping them out. Warren is looking at the right's power sources and singling them out and going after them in a way that Sanders often doesn't. Sanders will say the ruling class. Sanders will call out the millionaires and the billionaires.
Right.
But he doesn't get discreet in the way that she targets their power.
See, that's interesting because conceptually though, I think he's more on it than she
Agree.
is, right?
Agree.
Like, because it is capital. It's not just these subsidiaries
Correct.
that so. And then to me,
that's why I think with him as president, her as vice president, be like a devastating team. Like if she was running personnel and like day to day, who we're going to go after, and he's setting the broad frame of the ruling class, capital versus workers. That's devastating.
Because that's the foundation. I mean, right. I mean, so that's interesting then, because actually then we do have a fair amount of agreement if what she's doing is subsumed inside this broader structure he's pointing to. I mean, that's how I
think she resists that partly because it's not who she is. She's not a person of the left, like we were saying earlier, and also partly because she probably doesn't think it plays well.
I think that I think you're right about both, and I think again that's where it actually starts. It just does feed back to like the notion of like no, there's actually really significant differences here, and I think that ultimately you're going to need to put capital in play, or we're not even going to make the attempt to do the kind of effort that we're going to need to undertake to rebalance these things.
But capital is like unless we're going to lead a full-on revolution, like capital is expressed through the banks, through the payday lenders.
Well, there's no doubt, but Bernie's has clear plans on those too, but he also has like the most radical approach to revitalizing labor unions. He has I think, a federal jobs guarantee. I think those are the things that, and I guess when I mean technocratic, and it's kind of like an overused word. It doesn't necessarily even need to be negative, but it's like, what do you look at society and do you say, yes, we need to do all these things against the banks and the payday lenders and everything else, and we need good regulators and smart people writing that out, but how do you actually start to fundamentally put in place a rebalancing of the forces in society? And because even like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, it's like, okay, the Republicans first, they try to gut it, but then they realize like, well, actually we can just keep this going and use it to fuck with people, right? Like, sure, we have a new institution upon which now we can just, everything else has been Orwellian named by Republicans. Great. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That'll be our new vehicle to screw people over with exorbitant credit card rates. But when you have a president with the conceptual understanding, and again, the ambition that he's putting on the table, And that's really where I'm starting to get, frustrated, because it's like, I think some people have been saying for quite some time, I want somebody to run for president who will talk about the military industrial complex. I want somebody to run for president who will be unapologetic and clear about single payer, who has a strategy for labor. And it's like, okay, well, you got it. He's doing it.
Yeah.
No one else has put this on the table. So I think that is where it's, and I think that also is the dividing line in their coalition. It's not, to me, that she might potentially reach out to a broader set of people, although I might be I'm definitely more skeptical of her ability to do that than you, but you might know that better than me because you've been following her.
Oh, you mean in a general?
In a general. I actually have real concerns about that.
I think he's a stronger candidate in the general.
Yeah, I have super, and
I think he's a weaker candidate in the primary and a stronger candidate in the general.
Definitely, for sure. But I think that that where it go, I notice now a pattern in every conversation I have from people who obsess about this stuff and do this stuff professionally or don't, that dividing line really does actually start to become very clear, which is, I want someone who plans and implements and I tune out, versus I recognize on some level that this is going to involve a much broader democratic buy-in and a serious confrontation with power, and not a discrete one. Not this particular CEO is a scumbag, this particular industry is run amok, but like, actually there is a big picture problem here, and it's going to require more than a redirection from the top. And I do see that, and and that's how they chose to run the campaign.
Yeah, and I don't have any answers here, because the problem is, you're trying to win a 50% plus one majority in a country that's the center of the global empire,
right?
Where millions and millions of people are suffering, but it's a wealthy country relative to the rest of the world,
right?
Where people are demanding, constant growth, and are quick to, swing right.
Yep.
My whole book is about putting the most progressive agenda forward that you can, and bringing people on board. At the same time, it's like I said, it's a center of the global empire,
right?
And so, what does a working class socialist project look like at the center of, it's like the Roman Empire. You wouldn't expect Rome to be the place that's going to see the workers' revolution. On the other hand, even in Rome, there would have been a lot of pissed off people.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, there's quite a few pissed off people in this Rome. And there's also, the peripheries, yeah.
And so one idea could be, okay, we're going to bring revolution, but it's going to be orderly. I don't know.
But then that gives me to the other contradiction that I see. I mean, and this isn't, I mean, I think it's most acute with her because she has put some more ambitious things on the table, which is, if you're going to go for it, let's just go for it, right? Because, I mean, even Joe Biden's healthcare plan, as it is written, would piss some people off and require some significant...
The industry is already spending against it.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So even that...
If you could get that implemented today, be amazing.
Right. So you have one candidate who has the I'm going to put the actual plans on the table. We're not going to bullshit. And I'm the only one with that buy-in. I'm the only one who has more individual donors than Trump. And I'm the only one who seems to conceptually understand that there is a bigger picture problem here. And I think that also does have to go with how both of them imagine the past. I mean, look, obviously, I don't want Bernie to start running around and go, we were a settler colonial society from the beginning, and we suck. Don't eat hot dogs. Go to the Brattleboro Food Co-op and apologize. I don't think that that's a winning national message. But I do think, and I actually think, by the way, in terms of credibility with a broader set of working class people, the fact that he's willing, he'll herald amazing things in American history, like Eugene Debs and parts of the New Deal, which we should totally own and build off of. But it's also this guy does not have a rose-colored view of the past. And I actually think that some of that really translates now, because I think also on the flip side of, in terms of us being a global empire and a global economy, even the idea of we can just sort of like restore some kind of more stable meritocracy that's less like craven and corrupt. It's like, I don't actually know about that, once again, unless you have the global viewpoint and unless you have this broader take on capital viewpoint. But
yeah. I mean, and part of it is just self-affirming or self-negating, and we're going to get to watch it play out.
Right.
In that, Bernie's idea is that he's going to recreate a new coalition in the Democratic Party, that he can win the nomination with a working class coalition. It's currently tilting especially the people who come out for the primary in a wealthier direction. We saw 2018, ton of Whole Foods districts, swing towards Democrats, and so a lot of those people agree with Bernie's message. They're not exactly here for the entire class war.
Well, that's Karp's critique, though. That's the Patagonia
Right.
road to socialism, and I agree
Right.
with him. And I think, to me, like that's what's happening, right? Is that the Bernie coalition, the nerds who don't really want to do stuff are going to Warren, and the cranks are going to Tulsi and Yang.
Right, and
you
so,
don't have to co-sign.
No,
on
yeah,
that.
and nobody. But here's the thing: that
problems,
nobody
but I'm
needs
right.
nobody needs to complain about it, because, in other words, according to Karp's logic, Bernie and Warren are not competing at all, for different people. Bernie's trying to get new people to come out, the working class people that he's identifying, whereas Warren is getting these PMCs who are fed up with their situation, or some of them are not, and they're just kind of deluded.
No, I like the summary. I have two questions for you then before we get to these sounds. I mean, well, I guess, wait, I don't know, a question and a comment. My question is then, because does that actually, though, just in terms of where you're coming from politically, start to give you much bigger pause about Warren on just purely coalition grounds?
So yes and no. I mean,
right. Yes,
like I think Bernie builds a coalition that has a much better chance, I think, of winning the general election. I think there was an N+1 piece on the professional managerial chasm, I think it was called. I don't know if it was a response to Karp's piece or Karp's
no, it was before
piece.
Karp's piece. They would have never embarrassed themselves if it came out.
Right.
They wouldn't write that after Karp's piece.
So, and the piece was saying that like the professional managerial class is basically also at the whim of the ruling class, and that it is susceptible to being won over in a coalition with the working class. And I could see an argument where somebody like a Warren could stitch together a coalition of the PMC and the working class. At the same time, so could Bernie, because let's not fool ourselves. Like a ton of Bernie's supporters are also PMC. Right. All of the ones that we know of publicly are. Matt Karp teaches at Princeton, doesn't he?
Yes. Yes. I was going to say, speaking of which, yeah, right, exactly. Like, and as an example, the great Matt Karp is literally a professor at Princeton University. Right. Exactly.
And what was the other question?
Oh, and the critique I have, though, is that I think in the broader electorate, when you go and you talk to normal people, and when you talk to normal people, that's when you meet people who, or even see people on Twitter. Like the great example, one time Felix Biederman said on this show was he saw a Twitter exchange where Ilhan Omar, like right at the height of her getting, terrorized and piled on, some guy tweeted at her and he said, thank you, Congresswoman. You have a lot of integrity, solid there. I don't always agree with you, but clearly, blah, 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 you're a good person. And there's just like, boy, you and Trey Gowdy are the only people that give me any hope for American politics, right?
There's that.
So when you get out into the broader electorate, I mean, I remember I knew a woman once who she liked Bernie, but was also like, incredibly, frankly, extremely financially self-interested and highly affluent. So her liking Bernie might have just been like Jewish identity politics, was depressed, like physically ill that Biden didn't run, adored Obama. Trump was a little too crazy for her, but she would not vote for Hillary. But if Trump was going to be president, a good thing might be that Newt Gingrich might get a cabinet position. Well, yeah. So yes, when you go out into the world, people are all over the place. And it might well be that if you talk into certain, that there's a chunk of of Biden voters to take for Bernie and non-voters. But where I've never liked this, they're not competing, so don't critique each other or clarify, is it's like in the realm we're in, that's literally all who's competing. Right. Like that. There's no one in this space. I don't even see people on. I feel bad for Joe Biden in terms of like, I have never encountered anybody who's just like, yeah, I support the guy. Right. Everybody in this space is making some Sanders versus Warren argument. And I think, frankly, some of us were way too late and actually saying, wait a second, there's really significant, if we support Sanders, really being clear about those differences. So I think in the space we're in, I just don't truck that kind of argument.
But I guess the other part of that is like, who needs to hear that argument? Like who is a Bernie supporter that doesn't know Bernie is a democratic socialist who supports Medicare for all, Green New Deal, $15 minimum wage, fights for workers.
But I think it's the stuff we're talking about that's getting clarified, because I think there's plenty of people that, just like in 2016, if 2016, I mean, I remember this. I remember being like, man, I hope Elizabeth Warren runs against Hillary Clinton. Now, I know if you sat me down and you did a real political analysis, absolutely, I would say no. I want structure. I want somebody who can at least somewhat put capital into play. I would have had all these conversations. So I actually think heading into 2019, partially because the press coverage was so massaging over of their differences, that it actually did get a lot of people on both sides of the equation.
No, that's interesting.
Because I hear that from people all the time. I mean, I hear people saying there's no difference all the time. And to me, one, and maybe I'm on my hobby horse here, but I mean, I'm sorry. I think you do have some obligation to look at international affairs, and I actually think that's like a chasm of difference. Actually, I think that's significant, and maybe you could absolutely be right in terms of, I think Biden and Clinton have more of an interest, but her foreign policy is not good, and how she answers questions on foreign policy is totally America.
Yeah, you never know. You never know what you're going to get, because she's kind of just coming to it.
I mean, but even just like the Council on Foreign Relations stuff that she did about Africa, talking about population growth and this just highly paternalistic. I mean, that's disturbing to me. I think any of these people, by the way, who are in any way,
right.
So I actually think that
comes from. I bet it comes from some folks. I don't know if it's her staff or her. Read some papers, but they're just not embedded enough.
Totally. In
the conversation to be like, oh, actually, okay, it's true that these cities are overpopulated and it's causing problems, and there's too many like 30, 20, 22-year-old kids, and that's causing social problems. But you don't talk about population problems for these imperial-related reasons, and they're lacking that connection to the movement, to the kind of like the embeddedness in the left that would have prevented that.
Yeah, but I don't think that. I mean, so to me, yeah. I mean, I don't want to keep repeating myself here, but I actually think there was a ton of things where it was like, when I could have multiple conversations with people that didn't know the difference on either really clear policy stuff like all student debt versus another, some student debt, or like, no, actually the implications from, Venezuela to Iran to, I mean, she said in the same questionnaire, she said, Iran needs to get back into compliance. What? We all know the reason why this thing fell apart. So, that stuff to me is very disturbing, and actually like, if we all are just sort of running around saying, oh, well, they're competing for different voters and they're both lovely, we're actually missing, it isn't all just sort of like branding and point scoring. Although some of it is like, no,
not to draw any attention away from your program, but there aren't many foreign policy voters. Like if we're going to take it back to voters.
Well,
like
sadly, but again, in the world we're in, there's a hell of a lot of self-styled people who claim to care about X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So there you go.
The number of them.
Sure. If I was on, Meet the Press, maybe I'd talk about a different set of things. But the people that we're talking to are the people who, read the developments in Indonesia with great concern. Yeah. So there you go.
I would 1,000% co-sign that one.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, patreon.com/TMBS.
Yeah, because Ryan, you need to grow that.
Yes. You need to grow that consciousness. Let's play. All right. Let's. That's what I mean by consciousness. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.